Hello, everyone. Welcome to the American Museum of Fly Fishing's webinar series, Fly Tying with Scott Biron, streamer fly tying with Scott Biron, but more on that later. My name is Jim Schottenham. I'm the curator here at the museum. And as always, I'm joined by Museum Ambassador, Ewing Featherbirds Pro Staff, HMH Pro Staff person, Scott Biron. Scott, thanks again for coming.
Well, enjoy it. Nice trip over today and not too cold, so we're happy.
It's going to get to a point where it's not going to be so cold to go fishing. So
Right,
it's going to be harder to get you here, I'm sure. We'll take advantage of the fact that you're here today.
Yeah.
We, of course, going to be talking about a particular fly. Scott's going to show us all how to tie that fly, give us a history lesson on that, of course. For those that are interested, we do have all of the previous webinars that Scott and I have done on fly tying available from amff.org. So we certainly encourage you to go out there and review those as well. We are going to be talking today about a fly that's called, Scott?
The Cosseboom.
A Cosseboom, yeah.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting because you actually have a personal connection to this fly.
Yeah, I have a friend who is a Cosseboom. He is related to John Cosseboom, who was the originator of this fly pattern. And it was this kind of a short story, but we were fishing on his boat, trolling for salmon one day, and I said, Cosseboom is a pretty historic salmon fly, and he goes, yeah, I'm related to the guy who developed the fly. And I said, really? And so we started, going back and forth, and his brother had done all sorts of research on the family and whatnot, and I was able to obtain a photograph of John Cosseboom. And I showed it to my friend Chuck, and he was like, "Oh, that looks like my uncle, Boom Boom." So he'd never met him, so obviously he had, probably his son was who he knew. I've lost track of the actual lineage, but it was kind of a cool story. So
that's awesome. Did he, by chance, have any original Cosseboom flies?
No.
Oh,
no,
that's
of course not.
But fortunately, we know the pattern. You know the pattern.
Right. So we can talk a little bit about it. It is a cool fly. And I'm going to show you on this. Let's see.
Do you want me to switch over?
We'll switch over. We'll go back and forth there. This is a Cosseboom special, which is, this is one of the more commonly known ones that you can see readily. And now people fish this fly. It's tied a little bit bigger than the pattern fishes in many cases. Here's one that's more of the smaller size, but I'm going to actually tie on a big hook so that you can see better on the camera. The original, which we're going to tie, is this one right here. This is the original, and it has a black head, and it has a throat of yellow hen tied like a beard underneath, where the modern one, the Cosseboom Special, that one has a collar of yellow, and it's got a red head. But otherwise, and often on the Cosseboom Special, the ribbing is a flat embossed silver tinsel, and it sometimes has a tag, sometimes they tie it with jungle cock, but it's kind of cool that the Canadians actually have a series of stamps that have the historic flies of Canada and some really common salmon flies. And the Cosseboom is one of those flies right here. You can see it. And this just happens to be a first day issue of it. So there's a whole story behind it. John Cosseboom was 1875 to 1938, and he was from Woonsocket, Rhode Island. He was one of these jacks of all trade type guys. Was head of the Kiwanis Club, a realtor, wrote stuff in a paper, just really important to that area. And like many people who like to fish, they would go to Canada, and they would actually, go up there to fish for Atlantic salmon. He was partial to the Margaree River in that area. And so the Cosseboom fly was developed kind of interestingly. he was taking a ferry from somewhere in Canada to another spot, and he was with a fellow by the name of Ali Baloo. And Baloo has a Baloo special fly. And I guess Ali's wife, Annie, said, "Can you make a fly with this green floss?" Now you can imagine they didn't take huge fly tying kits with them when they traveled,
Sure.
right? So he probably had like some basic materials, and he came up with this fly. In fact, you have a framed picture of the original that, to our best knowledge, still exists. And here it
There it
is.
is.
Okay, so if you look up in this corner right here,
Try and do that without the glare. That's a
yep,
little bit better.
yeah, it's much better. So right up here in this corner, that is supposedly the original one. There's a little note there that says, "I tied this on, such and such a date on this boat and tied it for Annie Baloo." And she took it and clipped it into that, and that piece has survived. Now, there's some other stories about how this fly came about, but that is the original way. And this is a picture of Keith Fuschler's rendition of it. And there's also a streamer fly, this one down here, a Cosseboom streamer. And this one was tied by the great and late Bob Warren, who was a great salmon fly tyer and angler. Really died too early, but he tied that fly, and I can attest for that being an excellent landlocked salmon fly as well as a brook trout fly.
So it's kind of interesting that all of those variations came about from the original Cosseboom. And you, of course, are writing an article. For those that aren't familiar, Scott also writes for the American Fly Fishing Journal, the American Fly Fisher. And in the article, you mentioned, the upcoming article, you mentioned that Cosseboom is what you call a breeder fly.
Yeah, so they use different terms, but I just use breeder fly because this fly has morphed into a lot of hairwing flies, right? We think of the traditional Atlantic salmon, the classic flies with all the different swan and materials that you can no longer get anymore. And the Europeans were tying those because that's what they were familiar fishing with in their waters and whatnot. Well, when the Canadians started fishing, they were like, "Well, we're not going to deal with a fly that lasts one fish. It gets beat up, all that work that you put into it." And they started taking these the patterns. They're kind of, this one, I would say, for the most part, is an attractor pattern. It doesn't imitate anything in particular. It just triggers response from the fish. But this one, you can go to Canada and you can get an orange Cosseboom, a black Cosseboom, a red Cosseboom, a green Cosseboom, all sorts of different ones. And then Fuschler and Chrome wrote the book on hairwing flies, and all the flies that kind of came about after this that look similar to this and have characteristics of it. So this fly was very important. That's obviously why they, incorporated it as one of the stamps.
So it's interesting. You talked about it being an attractor fly.
Yep.
The purpose of that, was it solely to alert the angler that there's fish in the area? So the fish may come up and rise to that and take a look at it, but that's an indication that maybe I need to change either size, color, or come up with a different fly altogether.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've never fished in Canada for Atlantic salmon. But I will say that they are attracted to certain bugs up there. There are a lot of like really kind of grubby looking flies. Ira Gruber tied a bunch of these really realistic kind of dull looking flies that were real great salmon flies. But they also, the Atlantic salmon, when they're coming upstream sometimes, they all of a sudden need a trigger to make them. And that's what these flies were doing.
Okay.
In many cases, you'd swing it through a pool, and for some reason it would, solicit a response from the Atlantic salmon. Those Anglers that go up there, they may fish 2 weeks and hope to get a bite,
Sure.
right? So the patterns like this, and there are guys that I know that go up with these flies today and still demand this pattern because it's so popular and so successful when they fish.
So if you're going to spend 2 weeks chasing something that's very elusive, you want to have a pattern in the end of your line that's proven.
Right. You want, and guides up there will just say, this is the way, this is the right size. Like I said, a lot of these Atlantic salmon flies are tied smaller to fish like this. And, these big Atlantic salmon, but they're looking for flies. Like Ira Gruber's flies were all those kind of small ones, but very, very, very successful patterns.
Nice. So which one are you going to be tying up for
Okay,
us
so
today?
we're going to do the original, right?
Okay.
So let me get going here. And, as with anything, I can't tell you exactly how he did this, but I've kind of tried to get I guess the best way is eliminated things that he wouldn't have done because of today's modern equipment, today's modern materials. This is kind of a really simple fly.
What is that you're laying down
So
on
I'm
the
laying
shell?
down white base of white thread. I'm probably guessing he didn't do this, but the the tail on this fly is green floss. The body on this fly is green floss. And if I had black underneath this, just like this black hook, what would happen is this green would get very dark when it got wet. So I just I kind of eliminate that. On some of our webinars, we've shown that when we've done the streamers that had the orange body or a floss body, we just don't want the color to bleed through.
Now, I have to ask, do you think that John, when he was creating this fly, used that green simply because he was challenged to use it?
Yes.
Okay, so it's
Yes.
not a color that he necessarily would have sought, knowing that he was going to be chasing those Atlantic salmon.
No. No.
Okay.
Now, I want to tell you something else with the history of this and the coolness of the fact that I have a friend who is related to him. So I had tied a Cosseboom fly with one of those stamps as a gift for Chuck. And I put the finished frame on social media. And didn't I get a response right away from a friend of mine in New Jersey who said, "Did you give him the frame yet?" And I said, "Yeah, why? Can you get it back?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And I was thinking, geez, did I make a mistake or something like that? And he said, "I have some of John Cosseboom's original floss." And I said, "Really? Where did you get that?" And he said, "I got it from Warren Duncan." Warren Duncan was a great Atlantic salmon fly tyer from Canada, passed away. Thank you. And so what I did notice when I got that strip, I got a strip about this long of it, and that the coloring was the common olive green coloring that is today that you get in floss. It wasn't the same. And, there probably was some color, disintegration over time and
Sure.
whatnot. But then this company, 54 Dean Street, they came out. This is a French floss, and lo and behold, this was the right color. So
Gotcha.
that's why we're doing it. So the first thing I just did was I put on a small piece of oval silver tinsel. That's going to be our rib. And I'm going to put the tail on. Just hang it in there a little bit. Give me a second to get this. the one thing that fly tyers hate is how dry your hands get at this time of the year, and everything wants to stick to them. And okay, there we go. All right, once we get it in place there, what I'm going to do is I want this body to actually be pretty smooth. So what I'm going to do is just work my way up, cut off the little waste from the tinsel, and I'm going to work my way up and bind this right in. Because when you look at most of these Cossebooms and you look at the Cosseboom that the original, the photograph of it, the body is got some size to it. It's not huge, but it's got some bulk. And I think that's because I'll show you. I run this up, right up. You got to do a little gymnastics with this, but once you get going.
I see that. You need to be pretty, your
Yeah.
dexterity needs to be right up there.
I don't know, it makes your hair hurt if you get it wound around the
And I notice you're keeping those wraps really tight.
Yeah, the one thing with floss, when you use the floss, you can, any little gap gets shows a lot of like incongruency in the body from the floss, because the floss just it picks up and magnifies any mistakes. All right, so we're almost there. And the reason I'm doing this is I want the body to be as smooth as possible. And this is a mustad hook. Like I said, it's a good size one. This is a size 4. I think it's a 36890, and it's got a return eye. So it's not a ring eye. It's got a wire that comes back, traditional kind of salmon fly hook. Okay, once I get up here, I'm jumping up onto the double wire. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to work my way back and then go all the way back. Nice, even wraps. You can see now, you're getting good coloring because that white base is really giving you it's not turning dark from having that black japanned hook underneath it. And I'm guessing he probably didn't tie it on a mustad hook. He probably tied it on a partridge hook, because that's what would have probably been readily available at the time.
Well, and keeping in mind, as you mentioned early on, they probably didn't have any tying kits with them per se.
Yeah,
he probably used, as you mentioned, what he may have had on hand on the boat.
Right. And here I'm going right back up. And you can see how it builds up a little bulk in the body, makes it look a little bit better. Yeah, and the Marguerite Salmon Museum actually still has some of his rods, his reels, photographs. So if you're up that neck of the woods and you want to see some of the original stuff, you can definitely go to the museum. I guess it's a little small spot. I've communicated with them a couple times. They're really nice up there. All right, so we got this in there. I'm going to tie this off because I'm going to switch to the black thread. I just tie it off. Wax on the black thread to start it. And then just bring it back. Okay, now we're ready to rivet.
And I think this would be a good time just for me to interject. For those that are new to tying, you'll notice that as Scott's going along and showing us how to tie this Cosseboom, if there are any steps or tricks that Scott's employing, Scott also joined us for a Tackle Talk webinar where he actually discusses a lot of tips and tricks to tying flies, like what he's doing today with the Cosseboom.
Right. All right. So I got 5 ribs on this. It's pretty simple. There's your body. Your body was part of it, incorporated your tail. So it's really kind of straightforward. The next thing that he was going to use is this beard, this material right here. This is a hen neck from a hen saddle from Ewing, and it's dyed specially, yep, dyed yellow. And I just take a small section off of it. And I want it to be right about there. Trim it off. And just lay it right in there. Cover it. It gives you a nice little beard right underneath. Now if we go back, and you can see the difference, this is a collar, so that I would not take the material off this, the barbs off this. I would wind this like a dry fly hackle around.
Okay, sure.
Now, this just gives it a little more action, a little bit more pulsing. This would have been more traditionally done at the time he was tying it. Now, the next material, and every Canadian would have one of these in their yard, is gray squirrel tail. So he didn't have to go too far. If he ran out of gray squirrel tail, he didn't have to go too far to get it. Now, if you look at the original, and I don't stack this or anything, I just get the shorts out, and then I kind of look at it. If there's anything taking a 90-degree turn, I just pull it out. This kind of laid in. It wasn't as long as the tail. So that's what we'll do. Tie this off and trim it.
Would that alter the fly's action if it extended beyond that tail?
You might get a short strike, right? Remember, that was our whole story with the there it is, with the tandem, right? Because the materials before the tandem would hang out too long, and beyond the hook, and the salmon would come and short strike it. So I put a little head cement on the ends that I cut, and then I kind of grab like a third, till I get them all. And what I'm able to do with that head cement is lock those tips that I cut, that area that I cut. The deal with squirrel tail is that it's real slippery, real slick. So when you try to tie with it, it can slide right out of the thread, no matter how hard you try to lock it in. So I like to put a little bit of head cement on it. I also put a little wax on my thread before I tied it in, because then it keeps it right up on top. And that's all in the our series that we did with the tips and tricks, while we use the wax. As I tell everybody when I teach a class on streamers, it's a life-changing moment when people actually realize they can use fly tyers wax. It's not dubbing wax. It's much different, but this is how the material, you actually melt the wax on the thread when you run it, and then when you wrap, you're actually melting the wax, the thread, and the material all together.
Which would include the squirrel here
Right,
in this case.
right,
Okay.
right. So what I like to do is this is Danville thread, and I like to open it up counterclockwise and it flattens the thread out. And so what I can do is just do my whip finish from back to front, and it makes a nice smooth head. And then it's really simple. It's a series of probably 3 coats of this is my head cement, which is Minwax brushing lacquer. And this is thin. In a matter of 5 minutes or less, that head cement is going to just seep way into the threads, into where the hen and where the squirrel tips are, and lock that in. Plus, we already know that I coated the very tips of the ends of the squirrel tail, so it's doubly locking it in.
Gotcha.
And then you can see right now, if we had a really high def look at this, when I put the head cement on this, it was completely shiny, looked like it was completely coated. Now you can actually see the individual thread wraps because it's sucking right in. And that's what makes these flies, if you do it right, makes it durable.
Gotcha.
So, the other thing I didn't mention, I probably should have, is that the hook, these Japan hooks can get scratched in any vise, right? They rub, that black will come off of it. So what I have is this very tiny little piece of plastic. Some people use a piece of index card that's cut. I use remember the plastic comes in men's collared shirts? Well, that's what I use. And I cut a little piece and I fold it over the hook where it's going to touch the vise.
And that's not going to alter the jaw's ability to hold that hook fast.
No, not with this HMH TRV. It holds it. And all the HMH vices were designed for salmon fly tying. Bill Hunter, that was his big thing. So they really hold the hook in there. Hold the hook in there well, doesn't damage the hook, doesn't scratch it. And then right now, this is already dried because it's thin. I could put another coat on of the thicker stuff. And eventually, what it would end up with is looking like this. You can see how shiny that head is on that one.
Hey, move that up, and there you go. That's it right there. Good.
And that's what ultimately you're looking for. So this is kind of cool because this fly, like we said at the beginning, it was a breeder fly. They were really kind of unique way of using the floss as a tail. Eventually, Flusher and Chrome in their book, they took, they took classic salmon flies that had all those fancy materials in them, and they used different colors of floss to get the same look in the water when it was wet.
Mm-hmm.
The expense difference was, I think the Americans and the Canadians became very frugal. Why would you spend a lot of money and time tying those flies? So
they're durable.
Very.
And they're adaptable.
Very.
And the fish like them, which is the most important thing.
Right. In the end, it's up to the fish. So, again, this comes in, orange, black, red, you name the color, they tie in that. And in fact, in the museum here, we have the frame that you saw, but also up right here to our left is a board that has the Derby flies on it. And guess what's on it?
A Cosseboom.
Two
of them. Okay.
2 variants. And it's this fly right here. It's the one with the red head. So
we have examples from the Darbys.
Yep.
What we're hoping to find, of course, and I know you spent some time doing some searching. I put out some feelers as well. We're very hopeful that whomever has the original Cosseboom fly that's attached to a card
right
with the documentation, It's out there somewhere.
Right.
We'd be interested just in learning its whereabouts.
If it was well and safe.
And safe.
And safe, right?
Yeah, right. We'd be
Right.
very interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, there's been several articles in the journal that have used that photograph in it. And so it's somebody has that, I would imagine, probably somewhere safe, and might not even know the value of what they have there, historic value. Monetary value, not so much, but historic value, pretty big deal.
I would think so, being that it's pretty well documented how that fly came to be, and an interesting story to boot.
Right, definitely.
Challenge and given some green floss and
Right.
go for it.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. And, and then just to withstand the time, early 1900 developed, and they're still fishing it, so.
yeah, that longevity does speak to its success. That's
Right,
great. That's
right.
great. Well, again, it's been very educational. Thanks very much for showing us. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, all of the episodes that Scott and I have done are available from amff.org. If you're not a member of the museum, I certainly encourage you to join. Your membership helps pay for programs such as this and other educational programs that we offer. And speaking of educational programs, we've done a number of these on streamers, and of course now we're talking about the Cosseboom, but I think we're looking at expanding a little bit.
Yeah, I think we might do a little bass fly coming up. Maybe we'll pick off one of Gottside's, or somebody who had some patterns that, again, is maybe has a little twist to how it was tied, but still is very popular. And there's a lot of history. He was a kind of a creative guy, and some people might say he was a little off the wall, but his flies still work today.
They work incredibly well. In fact, we were talking to a very young angler this morning, or later this morning, and he was talking about the gurgler. And you mentioned that they're just as effective on smallmouth bass as they are on striped bass.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, we've got that to look forward to. So again, I hope you'll join us for future episodes. And Scott, as always, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone.